So you have that problem with the risk premium, and because the risk premium is not being charged, we have a cost of that risk that's eventually going to affect somebody who is the last person to hold the loan when that loan enters repayment and the person fails to pay the loan and back the loan in satisfaction. So we have that risk premium, that cost of that risk, and that cost isn't being paid for by a risk premium. We have a liquidity risk, that liquidity risk, again, there's, when that last party is holding a loan, when that loan enters repayment, and the person fails to pay on that loan in satisfaction, then because that borrower is failing to pay on that loan in satisfaction, it's difficult to collect cash on the loan. Okay, because of that, there's a liquidity problem. But again, we're not really, even though there's that liquidity problem and subsequent liquidity costs, again, we're not really charging a liquidity premium in the interest rate, so we're having a cost that we're not paying for. Okay, so you got to think about it, and also you think about it this way too. The final party holding the loan when that loan enters repayment and the person fails to pay that loan in satisfaction, they are the ones who end up incurring that liquidity cost and that risk cost, okay? But again, because of the risk premium and the liquidity premium were not charged, and that cost, again, neither of those costs are paid for, okay? So that cost would again affect the final party holding the loan when the time comes to re-enter payment on the loan and the borrower does not pay in satisfaction on the loan and pay back in satisfaction on the loan. And then you could also look at it as all the parties before that final party that held the loan, before in times before that final party held the loan, those parties, they, down the line, they eventually, they subsequently sold it to that final party. So they passed that cost of, again, liquidity and risk to that party. So because of their transactions, they affected the final party with those costs. But those parties did not take on that cost. Only the final party takes on that liquidity and risk cost. Okay? So let's illustrate that externality in a graph. Okay? Okay. So let's keep with most of the hypothetical situations. So we still have lender A, we still have party 1, we still have party 2. Let's say party 3 is the final party to hold the loan and the loan enters repayment and the borrower fails to pay on it. And in addition, here's the thing. In real life, when these loans were sold, they often were not sold one loan at a time. Oftentimes a bunch of loans were packaged together and sold as one big package. Okay? So let's change that about our hypothetical situation. Instead of one loan with one borrower, we will have we're going to have 100 borrowers, so we'll have 100 loans. So we have 100 loan finances, 100 loan agreements, okay, back and forth between lender A and the borrowers. Let's just leave it at lender A. Let's leave party 1, party 2, again, party 3 is the final party to hold the loan. And so, and also remember this too. This goes back to the liquidity. They ask, well, why can't party 3 if they're having trouble collecting on the loan? Because the borrower is entering a repayment and they're not paying it back to satisfaction. Why can't they sell it to someone else? Well, what will happen is a subsequent party that they could potentially sell it to will probably see that. They'll look at the loan and they'll see, the borrower who has that loan is entering repayment, is failing to make repayment and satisfaction on that loan, so we will not buy the loan. Well, especially not at its full loan value. And so, in effect, then that final party has difficulty collecting on the loan, to the borrower to pay back, who has a loan to pay back, and satisfaction on that loan, and also they have difficulty in selling the loan to someone else. Okay, so they're kind of stuck in a way. But let's say we have 100 loans, 100 borrowers. Each of the 100 borrowers has 1 loan. We have 100 loan finances and loan agreements. We have lender A, party 1, party 2, and party 3. Okay. Now, let's say these 100 borrowers have equal credit risk. And let's also say that they all get, well, let's think about it this way. Let's say all these 100 loans are going to be sold to party 1. And let's say party 1 is going to sell all 100 of those to party 2. Let's say party 2 is going to sell all 100 of those to party 3. Because all of those 100 loans are going to be resold, you got to think, all right, when loans are resold, they're not going to charge the risk premium. They're probably not going to charge the risk premium. They're probably not going to charge the liquidity premium. So the interest rate that we need to decide on these loans need to be based on IR plus EP. Because IR is the risk-free rate of interest, that'll be the same for pretty much everyone. And because EP is the expected success projected rate of inflation, that'll be the same for all the 100 borrowers as well. So IR will be the same for every borrower, EP will be the same for every borrower, therefore IR plus EP will be the same for every borrower, which in our case, because RP and LP are essentially 0, IR plus EP will equal IN, so therefore IN will be the same for every borrower. In other words, the interest rate will be the same for all of these 100 borrowers, okay? So let's say that the interest rate all these borrowers will get, the IN will be 4% per year. Okay. All right. Now, what we have, let's go back to our externality graph. Okay. So with our externality graph, we had price, quantity, demand. We had supply, private cost to lender A, supply, private cost to lender A plus tax. We'll talk about the tax in a little bit. We have supply, public cost. The price equilibrium before intervention equals 4% per year. And the quantity equilibrium before intervention equals 100. So now, going to our quantity will be the number of borrowers, so that makes sense then, that our equilibrium quantity would be 100, since we have 100 borrowers in our situation. So let's say our situation is at the equilibrium. And because our situation is at the equilibrium price, think about what are we measuring the price of in this case. We're measuring the price of borrowed money, which is the interest rate. So our price is the same thing as the interest rate. Our price equilibrium is then, in essence, our interest rate equilibrium, which and again, assuming that our situation is in equilibrium, since our interest rate in our situation is 4% per year, our price equilibrium or interest rate equilibrium is 4% per year before intervention. Okay, but remember with externality, there is typically with a negative externality or with a cost externality, there is typically Typically the equilibrium price is too high. Okay, or I'm sorry, the equilibrium quantity is too high, and the equilibrium price is too low. And remember, I was talking about earlier. That's what happened That's what happened in the time leading up to the Great Recession of 2008. Is you had more borrowers than there should have been, and also the interest that was charged, because RP&LP were oftentimes not being charged, the interest rates were too low.
We also have our domestic government that we will shortly have doing intervention, which we'll go through in a little bit. Okay. But think about it this way. Let's say, looking at the the supply per public cost. Okay. Let's think about it. It is going to be higher than the supply per private cost to lender A, because here's the thing. There's that risk cost and that liquidity cost that, again, were not paid for because there was essentially zero risk premium, zero liquidity premium. And so even though lender A will sell that loan to to a second party, before that risk and liquidity problems end up panning out when the loan interest repayment and the person has trouble paying back the loan, because that lender A sells that loan off before that stuff can happen, then lender A essentially is not going to take on that liquidity and risk cost, but rather someone else in society will take that liquidity and risk cost, in our case, party 3. So if you add that cost, that liquidity and risk cost that lender A does not take on, but that someone else in society, specifically party 3, takes on, if you add that to the private cost to lender A, then you get the supply per private cost. Okay? Okay? And again, the way to correct this externality would be then to make the internal parties, for example, lender A, to make them take on that external cost that they otherwise would probably not take on. And that's where intervention comes in. That's what our intervention attempts to do. Okay? We had mentioned before that a common government intervention is something called a pigovian tax. Remember, what a pigovian tax does is it charges the party that is involved in the transactions leading up to that external cost. For example, the pigovian tax could be charged to lender A by the domestic government, and then that pigovian tax is charged to a party, and then the domestic government takes that revenue. It can do several things with it. Number one, it can spend it on outside government spending that's uninvolved in this externality situation. Number two, it can pay down a deficit if the domestic government is running a deficit, if it's spending, in other words, if it's spending more than it is taking in overall tax revenue. It can also, talking about other taxes too, this pigovian tax, if it raises revenue, if you're looking at it from, if you're going to balance out the revenue, you could look at it as, okay, if I collect more tax revenue from this pigovian tax, then there's less tax revenue that I have to collect through other taxes. What it can also be used for is it's charged again to the party that is initially involved in that external cost, but doesn't end up paying for that external cost. And then that tax is charged, the revenue is collected for that tax, and the tax being paid. The domestic government can use that tax revenue to pay parties that were, that ended up taking on that external cost. Lender A at the time that they sell the loan to another party, so in our example, at the time that they sell the loan to party 1, in addition so party 1, in that example, in that situation, party 1 purchases the 100 loans, lender A gives the securities for the 100 loans.